All right, well, welcome everyone to the December 15th, 2021 regular meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee for the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. I'm going to take a roll call here. Start with Kingston Cole.
Here.
Larry Minikis.
Here.
Stephen Keese.
Here.
Lucy Dilworth.
Here.
Rebecca Suggs.
Here.
Pat Randolph.
Here.
Max Perret.
Here.
Carolyn Longstreet.
Here.
And I'm Larry Chu, and I am here. Okay, before we head on to the next item, do any of the committee members like to have any adjustments to tonight's agenda? Okay, anyone in the public? No.
Nope.
I can't.
For any
see.
raised hands, don't see any raised hands.
Okay, don't see any raised hands. Yeah, that's not visible to me. Okay, at this time, it's our period for open comment. You can address anything on anything that is within the jurisdiction of the Citizens Oversight Committee that is not on our agenda tonight. Does any member of the public like to address this committee?
And I'm looking for any raised hands, and I do not see any.
All right. So moving right along, we now have our executive officers report. We'll kick that to you, Mark.
Good evening, everybody. Besides our family history discussion, I've got a few other things we could discuss. With this wind and rain, I was just before the meeting, I was outside securing some of our Christmas decorations that were deciding to fly around. The rain is definitely welcome. Some of you who attended the executive committee meeting, you probably heard me starting to get a little bit concerned with the dry weather, the dry pattern that we had entered into, because the fuel moistures for the 100-hour and 1,000 hours were already going back down to close to historic lows. So I'm really happy to see this rain. I'm glad that flooding has not occurred from it. The pace maybe could be a little bit less inches per day, but a nice comfortable pace like this is what we need for our fuels and what we need for our water supply. So I'm happy to see it. I've been seeing a lot of your names or a lot of your faces in various meetings throughout this week. We are on meeting 4 of 5 Brown Act compliant meetings for the MWPA this week. So staff put together a lot of work over the last 2 weeks to create 5 agenda packets and the complementary materials that go with it. And not only do we have a busy slate of meetings, the board of directors meeting tomorrow is going to be, I think, a fairly full meeting. But that's what you get when you're growing quickly and you're doing everything you can to get the work done that we're supposed to be doing. So I thank you all for how much time you've been putting forth, especially this week leading into the holidays. However, I think we're all going to be able to take a little bit of a breath following tomorrow's board meeting. We'll have a couple weeks without any MWPA related meetings, at least before we get to the executive committee in January. You all, many of you attended the finance committee meeting on Monday. A significant update to our procurement and purchasing policy. As you know, that our purchasing policy had been approved as a working draft so that we can actually get to work while we actually got in depth and created a very comprehensive purchasing and procurement policy. And thank you to Jean Bonander on the research she did, the template that she found, and she did the lion's share of that work. So received some great feedback from the board. We adjusted some administrative thresholds, made sure that it was clear that staff purchases needed to be approved by the executive officer. And so that'll be part of the packet tomorrow. We also included a reserve policy. And that reserve policy will be funded through our unrestricted reserves, which is our unspent revenue from last fiscal year. And the remainder of the unrestricted reserves from that last year will serve as our bridge money. Since again, I think I've mentioned this before, our fiscal year starts July 1, but we don't receive funding until December from our tax revenue. So we need to have some type of bridge funding from July 1 into that until we get that December tax dump. So the unspent revenue from last fiscal year is currently serving as that bridge funding, and then that'll create an unspent revenue from next fiscal year, and we'll continue to use that as unrestricted reserves for that bridge gap. However, we are recommending a 15% restricted reserve that would require board action to tap into the reserves. And when we did research, we identified standard practice in government is between 15 to 25% of the general fund. Well, one of the things to keep in mind for the MWPA is really our work is discretionary. No, we don't have any real non-discretionary work such as law enforcement or fire department that has to be able to maintain business. And so that's why some of the agencies go to a higher reserve fund so that they can continue those emergency services. So we opted to go with a 15% reserve fund, which equates to $3 million, or just under. The 15% is just under 3 million. So we rounded up to go to a 3 million reserve fund policy. And that policy stipulates when we would be able to tap into that reserve, why we would be able to do it, and then also expresses how we would reimburse that reserve fund. There's been a lot of talk lately at our advisory technical and our operations committee meetings for our objectives and the metrics that we will be putting into our projects and the building of our work plan portal. And those two are connected, because as the member agencies propose any projects, they'll have to connect them to goals, objectives, and metrics right from the beginning. And so it connects them all seamlessly. It'll be, and we've talked about this before, it'll be a one-stop shop. Once the work plan is approved, then that same spreadsheet creates the population of our website for the project tracking on our website. So we're really looking forward to the combination of the objective metrics and the work plan development platform. Let's see. One of the things that we'll be discussing at tomorrow, that we've discussed at the finance committee meeting and the board of directors tomorrow, is use of MWPA funds on public lands. We've had that conversation here. I'll just be laying it out I have been laying it out to the exec committee, finance committee, and then to the board of directors. And we've quietly launched our resident grant program for home hardening, matching, and D-space for low income and access and functional needs. We decided not to do a media campaign in December because we feel that any media campaign that we would push out now would get lost in all of the holiday media blitz. So we've got a pretty comprehensive package that we're building for a media campaign, and we're targeting either January 3rd or January 10th to launch that campaign. But that being said, looking at the analytics of our webpage, besides the homepage, our grant page is already the #1 visited page. So people are accessing that page. I heard, I don't know if it was on Pat's or on Rebecca's when they logged on, but I heard the fires or the wildfire watch in the background. And we actually talk about the grant program being launched in Firebeat. So once that gets rolled out, we'll start seeing more people going onto that website. I'm looking forward to seeing how that grant program performs. The tool that we're using, our DSI app, is going to provide us tremendous data so that we can continue to refine our grant program and make sure that it is tailored to meet our needs here in Marin as best as we can, instead of just winging it, for lack of a better word. And then I will close by offering a personal thank you for Stephen Keese. As many of you probably saw through our selection process, if you read the staff report, Stephen will not be continuing on as a COC member next year, and that in large part he put his application in. I'm trying not to speak for you, Stephen, but you said this in a public meeting. He didn't put his application in or he did to make sure. He's a team player. He wanted to make sure that someone was actually applying for the civic group, but he also wanted to avail an opportunity to someone else. And so the selection committee is going with a different direction, not because of Stephen's performance, just because of how he prefaced his application. But I wanted to thank you, Stephen, for the work that you did in the grand jury, in the campaign, in the creation of the language, and then setting up the COC as one of its first members for success. So thank you, Stephen.
you all are all welcome. It's been fun, and you haven't seen the last of me. So
Thank you for
Drag him
your
out with his
service.
boots on, right? Okay.
And with that, I'm available for questions.
Yeah, thank you for your service this past year, Stephen. We also have talked on the phone and stuff several times, and it's been a pleasure working with you. Sure, like you said, you haven't gone away, so.
and I thank you specifically, Larry, for the advice you gave us at the last meeting about, I think it's, what was it? Appreciative inquiry, appreciative interviews. I guess there's several terms, but thank you.
Great. Thank you again, Stephen. And questions for Mark? I see Pat's hand up.
Yeah, I just, at least to get lost in the end of the meeting, I want to say thank you to Carolyn, who's in a slightly different position. She's running eagerly away from us, I think, but she's certainly contributed greatly for the last year. And
thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. You know, I got a lot of hats on, and something had to go. So
Thank you. Thank you.
I fully
had some more
understand.
difficulties, but you know, I'll be around, and I might even watch your meetings now and then.
No.
And
They are richer for the both of you. Let me just say that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And we know that Carolyn will still be one of our important environmental stakeholders that's meeting with us on a very regular basis and providing the feedback that we need to have. So again, thank you, Carolyn. I really
Sure.
appreciate your
Yeah,
involvement.
no, I'm delighted with you know, being involved in the exciting work of this organization. So I just have one MWPA hat on, or maybe two, Fern and ESP. And so, yeah, I decided that I had to make my life a little simpler, and that's the decision I came up with. So I appreciate all of you, and it's been an interesting year, and we've learned a few things, and hopefully we've accomplished what we needed to.
And I can attest that Carolyn is continuing to work hard on her assignment for the annual report.
Well,
Rather
thank
than
you
just-
also to Carolyn. I did not realize you had not signed up again. So I think for both
Whoops.
you and Stephen, you can be proud that, you know, when you get in on the front end, you kind of help set, you know, the framework and the way this is going to go, you know, for hopefully several years out in the future. So you'll have your hands and your stamp on this.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Okay.
Carolyn. Dang. Come on.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Carolyn.
Oh, I'm getting a
Thank you,
separate
guys.
round.
That's right. That's right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I see Larry's hand up. Did you?
Yeah,
have a
because I do have a
for
question for
Mark?
Mark.
Mhm.
Mark, could you touch upon a little bit that was discussed in one of the meetings? I think it was executive committee meeting this week on new staffing that will be coming in and what the time frame is and such.
Thank you. Actually, that was in my notes right here, and I've skipped it. So thank you for asking that question. So the board had a strategic ad hoc subcommittee to look at what are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And one of the threats that subcommittee identified is actually being able to complete projects. And if we don't have the bandwidth to complete the projects, then MWPA may not be successful. And I think this is one of those weird things where you want to be frugal. You want to make sure that you're not overspending the taxpayers' dollars. However, I think we are not serving our role if we don't spend the entire $20 million a year on projects that they should be spent on. And so we need to have the bandwidth. We need to maintain an efficient and lean organization, but we have to have the bandwidth to be able to complete those projects. And we're finding it difficult to complete the projects right now. A lot got done in that annual report, or which as displayed in the annual report. And as I pointed out several times, the MWPA didn't do any of that work. that all of that work that was in that annual report was performed by our member agencies. And some of those member agencies are starting to pay the price for the increased work their staff has put in. We are looked at a way that we would be able to increase our staff in an efficient way and be able to get the work done. One of the positions is administrative analyst, and that is, quite simply, Ann and I are not succeeding in our overall responsibilities because the administrative work that we have been performing. One of the things that we would like to have right now is a vendor list. And we have to go through a competitive bid process so that we can have a list of vendors that, let's say it's for evacuation route clearing, and these are their hourly rates. And that way, when we have a project, we don't have to go out for an RFP for a vendor for that project. We simply go to these already competitively bid vendors. This would create an opportunity for us to be preferred customers for these folks, and they actually may keep crews around and run more frequently, knowing that we are a good customer of theirs. And how competitive that work is right now, becoming a preferred customer, I think is very important for us. There's so many other things that the administrative assistant is going to be able to help us out. After every one of our board meetings, I'm the person that's going around getting all the signatures. I'm the person that's filing all the making sure that all of our agendas and minutes and all that is filed in the proper place, which isn't really an effective use of my time as the executive officer. So lots of support for an administrative analyst. Fire Safe Marin really wants to focus on public education. That's their primary drive. But they have picked up a project management workload for us because we couldn't manage that. And they would like to have chipper days come into the fold of MWPA. The good news about that is that position is already funded through the approved project for chipper days. So it's no net increase to the cost for the MWPA. And then we're calling that position a vegetation management specialist. We are recommending a second vegetation management specialist to work with Ann after a project has been approved. Then that person would work with the administrative analyst, and that would be the person that's working with the contractor to make sure that they're meeting the guidelines of our project, and then working with our administrative analyst and finance team to actually pay that contractor when they're done. One of the that's built into the JPA language is that technically MWPA is the default for defensible space evaluations. And it requires an opt-out from our member agencies to do the D-space evaluations themselves. Well, the last couple of years, every agency has defaulted to opt out because we don't have the staff. Well, I have to be prepared for a member agency to say, you know what, we're done. We want you to do the defensible space evaluations as designed in the JPA. So we are proposing to create position descriptions for a wildfire mitigation specialist lead, and then a wildfire mitigation specialist type person. Those are the people that do the evaluations. We'll create the position descriptions, do the salary survey, but we would not fill those positions unless that demand for those positions comes about by a member agency not opting out to do not opting out and doing the inspections themselves. And then finally, we think the right amount of time for a grant specialist would be a half-time contract employee. And this would be a person that manages the outflow of resident grants, because there's a significant workload for managing grants going out. But it would also be the person that would be spearheading bringing grants into the MWPA, with my thumbnail ultimate goal that for every dollar a taxpayer puts into the MWPA, we get another dollar of grant money into the MWPA. And if you've ever, and I know Larry has, if you've ever been in the world of managing grants and the paperwork and the documentation that goes behind managing grants, it's extensive. It is a workload, and you will be audited. I've been part of an audit from the federal government, and unfortunately we had to, on one particular audit, we had to pay back $25,000 because of a clerical error. So we want to be able to set ourselves up that we wouldn't have to pay back grants. And especially if you have been audited and had a negative finding, that really impacts your ability to bring in new grants. And so that presentation will be going to the board tomorrow with the request to create the position descriptions, salary surveys, human resources policies, create an entire package working with the operations committee on some of the nuances of the vegetation management specialists, and bring to the February board meeting for approval.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen, I see your hand up, and then Carolyn.
Yeah, Mark, if you're going to do vegetation management or home hardening evaluations for the fire district member agencies, are they going to supply funds from their project to cover the costs to MWPA, or is that coming out of core funds?
No, it would rather than having to pass through, we have a 20% cutout for D-space. And right now that 20% is serving strictly as a pass through. So let's pick an agency for Mill Valley. Let's say Mill Valley Fire decides that they want MWPA to perform the inspections in the city of Mill Valley, then they would no longer receive that 20% pass through. It would stay within the MWPA to fund those positions.
Carolyn, did you have a question?
I was interested when you said that all the agencies have opted out of the, MWPA doing the defensible space inspections, but is that true of Inverness? I mean, your vans with the logo on them were driving around our town and everybody got inspected about the time of the Woodward fire.
And again, this summer, so what Marin County Fire, Ross Valley Fire, Kentfield Fire, Central Marin Fire, and all the West Marin agencies, including Muir Beach, have done, they've created a consortium. And they're pooling their monies together and creating one program. And so the employees are a combination of Ross Valley Fire employees and Marin County Fire employees. But to make sure that everyone knew that MWPA was funding those inspections, they put MWPA placards on the vehicles, patches on their arms. Nevada Fire, all the other fire departments actually on the inspection vehicles are co-branding. They'll have, like, Nevada Fire has a Nevada logo like this, and then the MW. So they're still getting done. They're still getting done, funded through the MWPA. It's just a matter of who they're employed by.
It's the same in Somerville.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Larry, you have a question?
I was going to save this for item 7 for committee reports, but the president's report seems more appropriate from this. I think the operations committee today, Mark, the meeting, one of the takeaways was our smallest agencies are really having bandwidth problems, serious bandwidth problems. And they're saying they have to sometimes rely on the larger agencies, but going forward, that seems to be one of the issues that the entire MWPA will have to be dealing with. And also yesterday, Sophia, and I don't remember her last name, was introduced to us. Maybe you could explain that relationship a tiny bit as well. Thanks.
Pat, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Thank you, Pat.
Yes, her name is Sophia Porter. And that was this is, I think, her second week. She's really brand new and really, really knows all her title is Fire Smart Landscaping Coordinator, and she's going to be working with master gardeners, but also she's employed by UCCE. She's not there's master gardeners, as most of you know, are volunteers, but she's employed by UCCE to coordinate a lot of work that master gardeners do, but also beyond that to professional landscapers, and be the source of university-approved scientific information for education purposes across the board. And this was a 2-year grant that was across the board that MWPA made, that went through the entire process of, from ATC to Operations Committee, et cetera.
Pat covered it really well. I'll just give one slight nuance, and it's nitpicking on words. It's not technically a grant. It was a core project that's being funded through. And I only offer that because we have outside agencies calling us up. Hey, we'd like to get a grant for this. And I want to make sure that we're clear that proposals like that need to go through the ops committee, advisory technical committee, and come through as a project proposal, and then it gets funded as a project.
Yeah, and she was definitely, and I'm sorry for the nuance of that. I know that it was a project,
Yeah.
and she's very aware that it's has a term to it.
Any
Thank
other
you,
questions? Any other questions for Mark? Mark, I had one before we go to the public. You had mentioned that they're going to go with a 15% reserve. Has the board or the finance committee either approved or recommended an investment policy at this point?
Thanks you for asking that. So the recommendation that went to the finance committee, and it'll be part of the board packet tomorrow, would be the Marin County Treasury pool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, typically for short-term stuff like that, the three goals are, liquidity, capital preservation, and safety. So, that or the local agency investment fund or Cal Trust, are all your options.
And based on we know some of the people on the oversight for that, we felt comfortable with that, going that route.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'll go to the, oh yeah, Pat.
Just one thing to add on Sophia's position. That to me is one of these things that's a little bit of a force multiplier, because master gardeners are volunteers and are not getting paid. And all the work that they do out there comes in Fire Smart Landscaping comes for free. So having someone with the real background in this is, to me, is a force multiplier. Just as I think Fire Safe Marin, you can say the same thing because of all the Firewise communities, is a force multiplier in getting the information out.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'm going to ask them if any members of the public would like to ask questions or get clarification on any part of the executive officer's report.
And I'm looking for any raised hands, and don't see any.
All right. So we will now move on to our consent calendar. There's only one item on the consent calendar, and that's the minutes from our last meeting. Would anyone like to pull that item for any corrections or rewording of the minutes? If not, I'll take a motion in a second to approve. Okay, we saw Larry's hand go up and then Stephen second. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Just show
Aye.
your hand is fine.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Max's mic looks like it's off, but if he objects, he would be outvoted at this point.
Max, wake up.
I do not object. I vote aye.
Okay,
Minutes look great. Thanks.
great. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go to item 7. First part of that is our monitoring assignments. We had several meetings this week, as Mark pointed out. Would anyone like to start that conversation? I know Lucy went to a lot of meetings this week.
Now, I've been to all of the meetings this week and plan to go to the board meeting tomorrow, but I don't know that there's anything that they've all been very interesting and enough to keep our interest in the meetings, but I don't know that there's anything vital that Mark didn't cover himself.
I thought today's discussion, Mark, maybe you can jump in with words from your perspective. I thought the discussion today about that Dan brought up about to take or not to take the question about the new hires to the board before all of the or to go asking about getting permission to do the job descriptions before we ask for approvals. I thought that whole discussion was really interesting. And I wondered, were there any insights there that you were surprised by? Or stuff you didn't think would come up? Or left turns?
No, it just surprised, no. But it did go more in depth than I had expected it to go in depth. Because quite frankly, we're not asking for the permission to fund and hire those positions. We're simply asking for permission to create the position descriptions. And for Dan, a little bit of it is the backwards nature, as he pointed out, of the board saying, hey, we want staffing, put together a plan for staffing, rather than staff going to the board going, this is the staffing plan that we would like to have. And so that part, I knew that was Dan's typical mindset. And one of the things that, and I've heard it before, and it is a little bit of a head scratcher for me, is the idea of having a couple of our member agencies create a pool. One of the agencies hire an employee to do the work for the veg management work for other groups. Whereas that was, in my eyes, that was one of the things that the MWPA was supposed to be about, is creating that efficiency in numbers. And so that one, and I knew that question was going to come up, but I think I struggle with that a little bit. I mean, we already have a consortium called the MWPA. Let that consortium work for you. It was a valuable conversation today, no doubt. I look forward to the board directing staff to create the position descriptions, and then working with that ad hoc subcommittee of the operations committee to work out the details that we had discussed, and then be able to bring back to the operations committee for further discussion for the whole committee before we bring it to the board in February.
Yeah, it seemed like that was a long discussion about how to fund and how to divide up the work. It was just really interesting how in-depth it got, or how widespread topics it caused.
Strong support for the administrative analyst, no ifs, ands, or buts. And one of the consistent themes I got from the advisory technical committee and the operations committee is that they think we're asking for too few employees, to be honest with you. But I don't want to take giant leaps of building the organization. We're supposed to be lean.
Yeah.
So let's take steps.
3 positions. So yeah, see how they work out and then cross that bridge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great question though, Rebecca. That was an interesting conversation.
Mhm.
I have a question for Mark. I listened to the finance committee meeting, and you mentioned at one point that you hope that you could bring the audit to them. That was what you really were hoping to do in the meeting. What's the status on the audit?
Still been being told some point in December, but
Right. Yeah. Well, you said that in the meeting.
We-
I'm just, yeah.
we are
we're in
some in December. I get that.
Yeah. Jesus. I'm crossing my fingers. Okay. Jesus.
It's gonna come out on Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Question answer. Right.
You'll have 3 days to review it.
Jesus. Right. God.
I hear you. I hear
Okay.
you.
All right.
Larry, you're on mute.
Sorry, we have Stephen and then Larry.
No, he had his hand up. Mark, you kind of touched upon it in terms of committee reports. That's the new portal, web portal for work plans, and this was the technical advisory committee on Tuesday where this was discussed, I believe, and it all looks very promising, and a way for to not shortcut but to automate the process so that these things can be pulled up pro forma, and not every field has to be filled in each time, or you have the ability online to do it much more quickly than the way you have been doing it. So that was one of, I think, the takeaways from the Tuesday meeting.
And one of the things I'm looking forward to is a spreadsheet supporting our 21-22 work plan was created 3 times. We actually had 3 different people created a spreadsheet based on the data that had been entered into our individual PDFs to support the 21-22 work plan. Not efficient practice, right? So this portal is going to allow for 1 entry.
So somebody, it's not 3 somebodies, did 1,056 or whatever it is pages of spreadsheets?
111 projects. So yes, they
Gee.
transferred. It may not have been every single word, but it would be one spreadsheet was focused more on the dollars, right? And so those were written in, and then another one would cut and paste program descriptions into one field and put another, and literally 3 different spreadsheets of 111 projects were re-entered. So I think I said it at ESP yesterday. Carolyn, I think, was there. If we go through that project again, there's going to be 17 people with 17 ropes that are going to hang me 17 times.
Yeah.
Uh,
So these,
thank you, Boyd.
who was doing these spreadsheets, if not you and Ann? That's a little confusing.
Yeah.
Oh, Ann and I were part of the people building those spreadsheets again. And then Panorama had to build a spreadsheet.
Okay, there you go.
Elisa Schiffman from our
Oh, I
finance.
see. There you go. Yeah.
Fun.
Well, it's a learning curve, we're taking baby steps and then extending those out to big grown-up steps. So,
And we'll all be able to say, gee, we were at MWPA back when.
Okay, any other questions or for Mark or reports from our MWPA meetings this week? Okay, hearing none, we'll open it up to members of the public and see if they have any questions for the executive officer or this committee.
And I'm looking for any raised hands and do not see any.
Okay, so the second half of item 7 for committee reports are the ones for our preparation of the annual report. Any of the committee chairs or specific members have anything they'd like to report on? Okay, the only thing I can kind of report on, but not give you a lot of progress, is I was able to get the data from, Alicia, and I've had a chance to look at it at this point. I have a number of questions I need to go back to her and Mark on. Once I get that compiled to the point that I have some either discussion points or things that, our subcommittee can review, I'll try and get that on the calendar. I know the holidays are coming up, so, whenever people become available. Okay. Any members of the public like to ask any questions of the COC regarding any of their committee assignments for the annual report?
And I'm looking for any raised hands and do not see any at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're going to move to item number 8, which is an action item. What we have is an update on our policies and procedures for the COC. We had that discussion that we started last meeting, and with the help of Mark and Lucy, we.
Larry, I'm sorry, excuse me. I do have a report from our committee, from the Transparency Committee.
Oh,
Am I
okay.
too late to do that?
No, we can go backtrack on that.
Yeah, I mean, we basically didn't have a meeting, but we had set up an email thread, and everybody started coming in with comments. The general look is, website looks really good. It's polished. You're working the kinks out. We have an overall very positive impression. Stephen, of course, thinks that there has to be more white space and less clutter. I think he's already told you that, Mark, but we're repeating it as a committee. That usually means the pictures and graphics clutter the navigation pages. Okay, thank you, Stephen. One thing that and it came up this week with in the Board of Supervisors in a big way, is the public seems to, and one of the supervisors seems to think that MWPA is in charge of all wildfire prevention, throughout the county. All right. And that somehow Parks and Open Space, all right, is not, it doesn't have to do it because the MWPA is going to do it. We know that's not true. You know that's not true, Mark. What we're asking, I think, is to have some sort of clarification. And one suggestion was that perhaps you and Max Horton might get together and write like a Marin Voice, and plus have something on each of your websites that clearly defines who's doing what, all right, in terms of wildfire prevention, all right, and what the other side is doing. And it's, you may have, it may be some other agencies, that's up to you. But
Yeah, there's also state and federal parks.
yeah, no, I know. But I mean, all I can say is a supervisor got up and said, well, the MWPA takes care of wildfire prevention. Parks and Open Space doesn't have to. That literally, I mean, it's in the meeting. So that's a recommendation to you to think about. Several acquaintances, Steve brought it up, but it's true of a couple other people I've heard from, that they're having trouble finding documents discussed in NWPA meetings. And the one that came up that was an example was a Fern letter, all right, to the board that nobody could find. So I'm not sure. Maybe you can help with that, Carolyn. You can send, but
Oh, a fern. Oh,
Fern, right?
oh.
Yeah.
I can address that. The complication was that once the meeting with our agenda platform is called Granicus. It's a web hosted software. Once the meeting is terminates, it comes off, it automatically is removed from our active meetings. And then it takes an administrative step to put it into the archives. And so when someone was trying to find that letter, which was attached to that board item as an attachment along with all the other letters, all the other components of it, that agenda was not able to be found because we hadn't archived it yet. So by 8:30 the next morning, we had archived it and it was accessible.
Okay. All right. Another item was a strategic ad hoc subcommittee that's making recommendations, which we've already discussed earlier. A suggestion, I mean, you may be already doing this, that we'd believe that a spreadsheet with the total compensation from each position would help confirm and under everyone, the public could better understand the implications of the job market and how you're doing it. But a spreadsheet with all the information that you can provide to the public, salaries, whatever. Okay. Lastly, we were told that the website will contain full information for each project, where funds come from, what they will pay for, plus all the environmental details, timing, and staffing. I think the COC is going to have to take a very close look at that as we proceed, and it may be part of. We probably want to include it in the annual report. We'll have a meeting next year or in January to get together to figure out which items we're going to probably discuss and put in the annual report. But that's we'll figure out what the issues and concerns are. Okay, that's it. Sorry, I was late on that.
That's okay. Yeah, Stephen.
Mark, I just went into the executive committee a packet for the December 2nd meeting, and I think that's the one that had a long discussion about the Fern letter. Am I wrong on that?
It was to the November board of directors meeting, and it'll be in the consent items.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, before I go on to Larry, I don't know if you noticed my whole screen went blank, but the power is flickering here, but I'm on a battery.
Oh,
Okay, that's why I didn't lose you. So,
Right.
but if I do get lost, then we'll have to kick it to Lucy.
Wow.
All right, go ahead, Larry.
No, the same thing. The moment it happened to you, it happened to me too. It flickered and I looked up and I said, oh no, here we go.
I'm right down the street, mine.
Right,
Lights are
you just didn't.
No.
The people down, we're on a different, my neighbor is on a different circuit than we are. two houses down, but oh my God, I forgot what I was going to ask. Okay. Oh,
I can relate. I can
Kingston.
relate to that.
Senior moments, okay.
It's directed to Kingston. You said, I missed that meeting. You said a supervisor said, well,
Yeah.
Made that comment, but did anyone explain to the supervisor that 20% currently is going toward wildfire protection out of that budget?
No, no, not to my
No one
knowledge.
said anything, yeah.
No, yeah, but it's 20, it's biodiversity. The 20% is for, and there's no explicit wildfire prevention. And that's one of the things that COST has been working on is to have a specific allocation under wildfire prevention. And it looks like that's not going to happen. And one of the reasons it's not going to happen is, well, because one of the supervisors believes, that they don't have to do that. Just continue doing biodiversity, and nothing, and wildfire prevention will be taken care of by the MWPA. I was just dumbfounded when I heard it. So
yeah, I think it needs a little clarification because it's,
yeah.
Let me speak with an MCL hat for a second. It's our understanding that it has been specific for all this time for wildfire protection, but you're saying it's more general towards, but I think they're gonna have to clarify that for us because we heard differently.
Well,
I'm not
okay.
arguing the point. I just think we need to get clear.
Sure. Gotcha.
You're talking about county parks, Marin
Yes.
County open space.
Open space,
Because-
parks and open space.
A number of the MWPA projects are on state park lands, some of the recent ones.
Oh, I know.
So, they are collaborating or they are taking care of some of the fire prevention on Marin County open space lands.
Right. No, we've talked with Max Gordon at COST. I'm putting my COST hat on extensively about this, and we were, but we were pushing. COST has been pushing that there be. We know there's work that's been going on, but it's not been specifically called out as a budget item within. All right, the parks and open space. Okay, we wanted to have a specific definition of what and as much certainty about wildfire prevention as possible. Okay, and as it's written now, that's not the case. It's biodiversity, and okay. I'm just,
So additional work besides what
Yeah.
MWPA,
Yeah.
which is really kind of on the borders of the
right.
preserves.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the supervisors are going to go back and to basically do right now. It looks like they're going to do the same allocations they've done for parks and open space from the last measure rate. So they
Mhm.
checked everything back, and it's not something we want, but it's all right. And what COST wants. So
Pat, you had your hand up?
You're on mute, Pat.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think Mark could say this, that in several of the meetings that I have been in, when we talked about MWPA's ability to work on public lands, it has always been mentioned that while we will do work on public lands, we want to partner with them and have a multiplication of, it's not MWPA's intention to do all of the fire prevention work on county, state, and federal lands, but rather to partner with those agencies. And Mark can probably say it better than that.
Yeah, Mark explained to us that they're doing the environmental compliance part, which is also expensive. And so they come in, and that's where the multiplier you were talking about, Pat, comes in that they're able to do more work for less money because Parks is picking up that part, which they want to do anyway. They want to do their own environmental compliance. Mark, am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of it. The other part is that we're currently researching how much each of the public land management agencies are expending on their lands and wildfire prevention, and we're going to express that in a dollars per acre value so that we kind of know what the starting point is, and so that we can continue to make sure that doesn't tilt the other way, where MWPA funds are supplanting the projects that they had already been doing. We're working on that now. I look forward to that data soon. I can say that Kingston's 100% right. It's not, the current Measure A has not specifically stipulated as for wildfire prevention, but there has been significant wildfire prevention, and Parks and Open Space has been a great partner. And I think I've said this in a couple different meetings. There have literally been projects that we have proposed on park and open space land, and their response back to us, hey, MWPA, don't worry about it. We actually have that project on our docket. We'll take care of that. You guys could take it off your docket. And so one of the things I'll be suggesting to the board tomorrow, rather than looking at cost shares at a project by project basis, because there could be projects that have absolutely no MWPA funding, and then there could be projects that have absolutely no Measure A funding that are on open space. I think we have to look at the suite of projects and make sure that that ratio is what we need it to be.
All that being said, I think there's significant confusion in the public's mind about who's doing what. Okay. And we got an election coming up in June, all right, with Measure A, and whatever you can do to straighten that out, all right, with Max Corton, all right, so that everybody knows that you're working together and you're both doing wildfire prevention would be very helpful. Okay.
I agree with you, Kingston. Yeah.
I'd like to, speak up for the biodiversity work that the county does too. And I not want to see that reduced, but that's not for our committee, so never mind.
putting on another hat, are we?
But Carolyn, that's what you're about, so that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, good.
Well, I mean, cost has their agenda and other groups have maybe a different agenda. So cost isn't necessarily our agenda, right? So, I mean, it's good to find out what people are advocating for, but
Larry, you've muted yourself, Larry.
That's outside of the discussion for this agenda item. So
Thank you.
We'll keep it narrow to our reports at this point. I thought I saw Stephen's hand go up. Wasn't sure if he had any questions or comments regarding the issue that came up, which is about transparency. That was Stephen. Yeah, no.
No, it doesn't look
No,
like
okay. Since we brought this back in, Rebecca.
At the very end of your report, Kingston, you mentioned the work plan for next, before is that your transparency, right?
Right. We want
So
to, we will look,
yeah. Before you guys look at that too deeply, let's talk just to make sure that we're not duplicating effort. Because
absolutely.
Our team is doing that, is looking at it too. I totally get it about the transparency side, and I think we can still both do different sections of that, different perspectives on that.
Yeah.
So I think that's valid. I just want to make sure we don't duplicate.
I agree. We'll do that.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to reopen it back to any members of the public who would like to ask questions about Kingston's report. I think, wasn't sure if Mark froze.
I don't see any, I'm sorry. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, that's fine. Is there any members of the public out there?
That's not fair. That's not fair.
No, we have 4.
We have 4.
Yeah, I'll still ask the question, but just want to check. All right, so now we're going to move on to item number 8. Yeah, Stephen.
Real quick, Larry, you can click on participants and then all attendees, and you see the 4 people who are.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, okay. I must have clicked the wrong button.
Did we get?
And I've given you co-host responsibilities, so
okay.
you were able to turn off so.
Yeah, I usually have a wider screen so I can see everybody, so didn't have that, my participants thing up.
Wow.
Right, that's fine. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 8, and it's a continuation of our discussion about changes in our code of conduct and policies and procedures. Mark had put a report in our packet for this meeting, and want to thank Mark and Lucy for their assistance in getting this crafted. you'll probably see that the biggest change is actually splitting up the policies and procedures in the two different sections. Now there's one related to us as individual committee members, and then the second half of it, which is about how we engage with the board and the board committees. So at this point, I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if Lucy has anything she'd like to add to that.
Yes, I would like to. One of the new elements that I think we have in the procedures is a conflict of interest provision, and I think that it is important that we have such a thing, and because if we're there to monitor transparency in others and the right behavior, we should also be demonstrating that amongst ourselves and being very careful. The one element, as I've thought about it, that I think maybe we need to insert is a definition of conflict of interest as to whether or not it's a purely financial conflict, mainly because I think it gets very ambiguous, as some of us have been elected to represent certain constituencies. Is it a conflict of interest for that person to be advocating for that, the interests, or at least representing those interests? And does it make sense to make the conflict of interest purely financial, which in general, I think for us, since we have no ability to dispose of budget items, makes it a very remote issue. But Larry, I didn't have a chance to talk to you about this, and I welcome your thoughts about that.
Well, the way I had introduced it the last time was that it was not just about a financial conflict of interest, which is, how the state's Fair Political Practices Commission looks at it. And, with our committee, I really don't see that many times in which we would have, let's just say, the perception of a conflict, even if we represent certain areas or certain, groups that, have been designated as being part of membership. And the reason for that is, we tend to always be kind of going outside the lines a little bit, and I'm fine most, with the discussion, since it's just purely amongst ourselves. But, when we start talking about things that are associated with whether projects should be done or not, that are outside the scope of whether it's within the metrics, which is what we review, the metrics being that, X percentage has to be done in certain types of projects, or X number of dollars has to be spent in a particular, area of work. That's really what we're doing. And, if we get into a discussion, say, about the merits of a particular project, well, then that really goes outside of our committee and probably don't need to be discussing that. So then the issue of a conflict probably doesn't come up. That's kind of my thought on it. But just to have the policy in there, as we stated in the last meeting and Lucy reiterated, is that, we are trying to oversee, the whole, function of the board and the committee, and the committees. Part of that is about transparency, and, we should demonstrate the same transparency that we are watching over in other parts of this organization.
Well said.
Okay. I would say that, I started out with the whole thing trying to not deconstruct too much of what the group had already approved, but there were clearly some items where, paragraphs or specific points needed to be totally rewritten. So the language may appear a little different, but if you compare the two, they still fundamentally capture what the committee had approved the first time, and then adding onto it the things that, we introduced the last time. As Lucy and I discussed it a little bit. We also weren't sure if we provided enough clarity in terms of what the, I'll say, terms of engagement are with the board. Last time we had said that, any communication would go through the executive officer. And we kind of tacitly agreed to that point. But an interesting point did come up. This is not a statement about Mark or even any of his successors, if it ever comes to that. But if there's a matter that has to, that may involve, the executive officer directly, then, that may be an exception where, we might want access directly to the president of the board or something. So anything you want to add to that part, Lucy?
No, I mean, just so the way we handle that in the language is to say that communications will go through the chair or the board, or the executive officer. So that gives us an opportunity, if we do need to express something, to use that avenue. Though I think we would in general prefer to use the channel that the executive officer has, because I think that keeps it sort of orderly and we know what we're thinking and what we're saying. I think it helps us.
Yeah.
There is one other point that I'd like to make, and that is that we're going to be beginning a report writing process, and our report is a hybrid report. One side of it is going to be an approval of the audit and the financial side, which I think is pretty cut and dried. The other element of it, which is where we look at the transparency and work plan issues and conformity with Measure C, is going to be more along the lines of a grand jury report. And because we might be making findings and recommendations. Not necessarily, but that we have the possibility of doing that. In order to make sure that we are proceeding properly, I propose that we use the procedures established by the grand jury, which is that you triangulate every fact that you're basing your finding or recommendation on, which means you seek it from more than one source. And given that we might have to go back and check things with, say, some committee members, I was thinking that it would be a tremendous burden on staff to have to convey every question for us, and then if that gives rise to another question that we'd like to confirmed, it simply means I think it would be too burdensome. So what I'm proposing is a carve out during the report writing period, in which we could, and more than likely it would be with committee members, not members of the board, seek confirmation on just a fact or something to clarify if we've got something wrong, or run something by them and say, did we understand this correctly? Not on every fact, but anything that we're uncertain of. And the procedures that the grand jury uses that I would propose we adopt is that no one person speaks to any committee member, or so there's always another person there to confirm that that was the conversation, that the understanding was the understanding. That's what we were told. It gives us a certain sense that what we're understanding is that what we're using is reliable information. So the details of what we're going to carve out, I think we need to think them through. But I don't know if I would like to hear whether you all agree that it might be necessary. And Mark, too, I'd like to know whether you think that would be sensible.
I think you're getting ahead of us, Lucy. I mean, I don't know what the grand jury procedures are, so I'm not in a position to really support or not support your suggestion. So we need, I think I'm going to be gone, but I think you all need to circulate it and give the committee members a little more time to educate themselves about what these procedures are.
No, that is the plan. At a certain point, we will draft something and it'll be circulated. But I wanted to make it clear that although these procedures are limiting our communications in a general way, there might be a little open period where in which we have a different set of procedures.
Right. I actually have another comment on that, the restrictions on communication. Paragraph 10. Any non-agendized communication between the COC and the board or any of its committees shall go through the chair. Okay, we've discussed that. Members will not communicate with members of the MWPA board directly unless they are speaking as a designated observer and so on. My problem with that is Dennis Rodoni is my supervisor, and I have other things to discuss with him, and I do meet with him from time to time. So I think that is a little too broad. You just, I'm not sure what even the intent of it is, but will not communicate with members of the board about a certain, you got to define the
Yeah.
universe of
Yeah.
communications that shouldn't be done, shouldn't be had.
Yeah,
If you
that
see
was
what I
not the intent. So you're correct about that. It should be about MWPA business. COC,
Something,
MWPA
Yeah,
business.
yeah, it should be narrowed a bit. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know,
Pat, you
I
your
have
hand
the
up?
I have the similar problem with being on MCL, where I may be speaking for or on behalf or asking on behalf of MCL. So how do I put on that hat under this
Yeah.
restriction? It seems to bind things in an odd way, because I won't be the only one who's wearing several hats on these committees, that's for sure. So I don't know how you resolve that. I have no idea. Yeah, so.
Well, you just narrow the universe of topics that we're not allowed to discuss with board members.
Mhm.
Well, I think one of the restrictions will be that we don't speak at public meetings, which gives the impression that we have more than one hat, and that because of the confusion as to who we are and what we might be speaking, we're giving up that right by serving on the COC. We're actually giving up the right to speak at public meetings. Now, at private meetings, if you have something to say that is not COC business, obviously you can say that, but it's the public forum that we think makes it very difficult and confusing. And so
I think that's what Larry's bringing up. He might
Right.
want to address the board on behalf of MCL.
that's
And
right.
if I was still staying on, I would not agree to that because I do appear at these meetings sometimes. But I'm leaving anyway, so it's not important for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a real world example. On Tuesday, after the presentation of the new portal, I had a question really for Anne, which is, it was explained that people who were able to sign on would have editing rights. And I said, will you be able to track those? How are you going to track those people? Because if everyone's editing it, it sounds like you could get into some difficulty on work plans. So how does that work? Because there was an innocuous question, which really is sort of COC, very much COC based. And it was at the moment. And it was a very legitimate question. So I'm really just trying to figure out how to navigate this thing.
Larry, what meeting was that at? What did that come up in?
I believe that came up on Tuesday at the TAC.
Advisory technical?
Yeah, I believe it did.
I think that since we now have a standing item for COC questions, that would be a very legitimate question to ask.
Mhm.
And you'd be perfectly free to explore the mechanics of what's being discussed or have it explained to you if you had a question.
Except he doesn't have permission to do that from the whole committee yet. So you
Well,
have to put it off for a whole month.
sorry, say that again, Carolyn.
Well, my understanding is the rules prohibit any of us from raising any questions in these meetings unless it's been pre-cleared by the whole COC.
No, I don't. I think that's not what we intended, and maybe we need to check that that's not the language. We have designated observers for each of the committees, and only those observers could bring up a question in the standing item. Or they could coordinate amongst themselves, having looked at it, and they might say, if Pat's going to be the one that speaks, there is going to be the designated observer's voice. I could contact Pat and say, could you ask about X for me? But we haven't even refined it that far. But it's not anybody that could speak on those standing items. It's just the observer or somebody who's been pre-authorized by the COC with a specific piece of information. Does that, I mean, is that, I think it could work. We're trying this. We aren't really, but really keen.
I don't think it works to require that the whole COC authorize a specific question. That doesn't sound, feasible or practical because of,
No, I didn't. I think
something's going to come up right then, but I thought that's what, maybe this is a previous version of this that I read, but I thought that's what it said. So if it doesn't,
I think
that's an improvement.
Well, that wasn't the intention anyway. I think we need to double check the language, but I think you're either an authorized observer to that committee and you could speak, ask a question, or you can have been pre-approved by the entire COC to transmit a COC communication, fully authorized. Otherwise, you're speaking as a COC member, asking a question, seeking clarification.
In number 9, it says if there's a COC discussion item on the agenda, so that would be, for example, in the, was that today in ops that you got to speak of? So in that period, it says a designated observer or authorized member of the COC can use that period to ask questions about issues of concern, if any. Additionally, a designated observer or authorized member may convey pre-approved communications from the COC. You've got 2 different kinds of things there. One is, got questions, use that period to ask them. Got a pre-approved issue to bring up, you can use that period to do that. So am I reading that correctly, that the first part doesn't have to be pre-approved?
That was the...
But you still have to have a discussion item on the committee agenda in order to be able to bring anything up.
We now have it. We had it on the executive committee, the ops committee, and the finance committee. We now have a standing item. It's called...
Okay. So maybe that wording should be modified to take into account that we do have a standing item,
It might just take a little bit of
tweaking,
Yeah.
So are there any committees that haven't gone in that direction to have the regular agenda item?
We've asked for those 3. We haven't asked for any other.
I
Like
see.
the TAC
Okay.
was not part of our original.
Okay, yeah, no, the last thing I saw said they were leaving it up to the committee, so I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the 3 that we had anticipated having a standing agenda item, each of those committee chairs has placed us on the agenda for their most recent meeting.
sorry, Pat, I shouldn't be.
No, I just a point of clarification to me, because when this says in the very opening line of this section, that's how we interact with the board of directors. And to me, the board of directors, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the board of directors is the board and the committees that it sets up, which are finance and executive committee. The operations committee and the ATC exist in their own right. They are in the wording of all the founding documents. So when I read this as board of directors, I'm thinking we're leaving out ops and ATC. And I need some clarification. Do we mean by board of directors all of those, or do we mean to limit it to the actual board and finance.
Subcommittees.
and-
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. That's a good call out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, the original intent was to have it for any of the board or their committees,
Standing committees.
standing
Yeah.
committees.
But I, in my mind, operations and ATC are not committees of the board. They're committees, but they exist by law in their own right.
Okay, thank you. We can clarify that. It should be about the board and its committees. Standing.
I'm gonna, I apologize. I have a
Yeah.
minor little issue to deal with. I'm gonna have to step away just a second.
Jesus.
It sounded like more than a little
We're one
issue.
big
I said-
family. Let's just look at it like that. We can all relate.
So if we are saying the board and its committees, then operations is not a committee of the board. It is a committee in its own right. So to me, I would be more comfortable with a more generic language of the board and other committees or something to that
Just
effect.
specify the committees that it applies to.
Yeah, there's very specific committees, so you don't have to say other. You can be very
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. I think I was going to make an earlier comment that I think we are all looking at this as a living document, that we may come back to it again and
Yeah.
you know, not see it as set in stone forever, that we may see that we need to adjust things later. And I think that's important to recognize. I mean, do we all agree it's something that we may come back to again?
Yeah, I just would not like to see ATC left out. I think if we're saying
Sure.
right now, we're not anticipating using it there, but I think that's the genesis of projects, and that may be the very place where before something gets set in stone, we need to ask a question or
Mhm.
perhaps send a comment. So I feel uncomfortable leaving
Well,
ATC.
Pat, as it reads, you have that, ability to do it. There's nothing to stop you from.
But I think, Pat, are you suggesting that we actually request a standing item on the ATC agenda as well? And we
Well,
really have to ask
I
the,
just wouldn't like, to me, it's wordsmithing, which is, this is not the place to do the wordsmithing, but just when it says MWPA Board of Directors, I feel like that's limiting it.
Right.
And if we said MWPA Board of Directors
Operations.
and other committees or whatever language we want to use, we can talk about the language to be inclusive, but I don't like seeing those left out.
And committees identified under the JPA, or however you want to say it.
Well, probably the
committees.
easy thing is to not focus on the board and just say any standing committee of the MWPA.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
clean,
that's-
clean.
Yeah,
That's
so
clear.
that probably works. I think we've had a good discussion and probably need to think a little bit more about what I see as broader participation of the COC members. Because we are somewhat unique in that we may be representing other groups. You know, I don't know if it's possible or practical for you as a committee member to want to speak on a particular topic and have somebody else from your same group speak in behalf of the organization.
It could happen.
Yeah, but that's what I'm suggesting,
Yeah.
because then it does separate your role as a committee member and, you know, maintains, you know, the public perception of, you know, the integrity of that part of the process. No.
Okay. Larry, my problem is pretty much the same as Larry Minikis mentioned. He's got a First Amendment right to speak, you know, as a member of several groups. All right. And I don't know how, I don't know how you get around that when he wants to put on that other hat and he's
Yeah.
also a member. I mean, it's other than to say, he has to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of the COC, I'm speaking on behalf of ESP. you know.
Well, even when we had it documented for the city of Larkspur, we knew that you could not stop anyone from speaking because of their First Amendment rights.
Right.
You know, the thing was, you know, you earnestly accept it as you know, working amongst and within this particular team. But if you feel really compelled to make a comment, there's nothing really legally or functionally that, you know, will stop you from doing it. It's a way of saying that this is what we're going to try and adhere to.
Okay,
Yeah.
You know,
that's fine.
So
Right.
can I, give you what I'm hearing you say is that there will be a rule that says COC members are not allowed to speak at the various committee meetings unless they are the official representative. Is that what the rules are going to say?
well,
Or
that-
they, you know?
in a simplistic sense, it would be yes. That's
Yeah,
how I
well,
intended it to be.
I find it
but-
problematic, but it doesn't really matter in my case. So I'm just voicing my, judgment about it.
No, but you're a
So-
citizen, Carolyn, and this is a citizens group. So whether you're on it
I
or
mean-
not, you still have an interest.
Well, whatever, I'm here tonight and I'm giving you my judgment about this issue. So I don't know, I'd have to think about how to deal with the problem.
Yeah,
of
it's
confusing
not so
what
much.
is the problem? If other people, members of the committee stand up and say something without clarifying who they're representing, that is a problem. We have a designated rep and nobody else should be speaking unless they are clearly stating, if they're speaking for themselves as an individual or they're representing a group, and if so, what group, I think that would work.
That's what I'm saying, the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's where you run into a problem. In the case where the committee has already decided on a position, but it may be in conflict with a position that a particular organization might not agree with. So if you as a committee member then speak in behalf of that organization in conflict with the COC.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
if it was the same issue, I guess in my imagination of how this would go, it would not be the same issue. It would be some other part of their agenda. Would not be the same issue.
Mhm.
I agree with you. I don't think if there is a position of the COC and there's a representative there to present that, nobody else should be addressing that issue. I agree with you
Well,
on
then-
that.
then put it-
But there could be other issues, on the agenda that one of us would want to speak up on.
Yeah.
But I
you
think
would-
I think if we just put in the rules, maybe that
Yeah.
any member of the committee that addresses, any member of the COC that addresses any of these committees and are not the designated representative have to identify who they're representing.
And make
And
an
it better
exception.
not be the COC,
Yeah.
right? It can't be the COC. So
And-
if you can figure out how to wordsmith that, I think it's probably workable.
Then put in, and Larry, just put in your exception. If the only exception to this rule is you may not speak if you are, if the COC has already determined what his position is on the issue, no matter what your outside interest is. Okay.
Okay, we can work on that. Mark, you had stepped away. Did you have anything you wanted to comment on from what you've heard while you were here?
He wants to
Um,
duck. Yeah.
You can tell my hair is wet from being outside, but I wanted to comment on Lucy's discussion about being able to have access to particular, and it would just be specifically members of our member agencies as you're working on your work product. And I wanted to express support of that. I don't like being creating a pinch point in communications. I've been fully supportive of whether it was Carolyn talking to Stinson Beach Fire, Pat talking to San Rafael Fire and Marinwood. The only thing that what I learned from this year through that process, it would have been smart on my part to reach, because I knew you guys were going to be reaching out. It would have been smart on my part to reach out to the member agencies and say, hey, by the way, members of the COC are going to be performing their duties and giving you a call and asking you questions. And so my recommendation is if we formalize that process, that we include a step that we would communicate with those bodies that, hey, expect some communication from the COC.
Mhm.
And not necessarily in a public meeting. It would be a behind the scenes, probably. Makes sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my support for that and the observation to have a preamble to it so there weren't any surprises.
Good idea. And one other thing in a practical way, Mark, if just while we're on the topic, because the grand jury power, when it requests an interview with somebody, it generally gets a very prompt response, which is certainly I'll be there at 10 o'clock. Because the position of the COC is not fully worked out yet, nor is its role in this way fully worked out, it would be very helpful if staff could announce that it's now the open season for confirmation, and that you, all the members of the various committees, might be asked to talk to COC members, and please make yourself available, because I think a lot of people feel that it's an unnecessary burden on their time.
And I think that preamble coming from me or the executive officer would help with that.
Good. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
we'd rather have subpoena power, but I don't think the board's going to go along with that.
Good luck with that, Kingston.
Trying to think how that could possibly happen. I don't.
Subpoena power is not on the agenda, Larry. You have to accept that.
The worst idea ever. Okay.
But it's amazing how much that knowing that you have subpoena power gets people to respond to you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, I will just add that I did contact several of the agencies in the West Marin about their work plan, and I got a good response in every case, either by email or on the phone. So I didn't really run into I didn't get a feeling that they were resentful or anything like that. So
Terrific. That's good to hear.
Mark, the only other thing that Lucy brought up, and I'll let you reply, if there is a succession of questions, if you didn't want us to keep coming back to you, you could also let that individual on the other end say that they, there may be a back and forth until, all the questions are answered or whatever, discussion is over.
Fully supportive of that. I do not want to be a pinch point or a bottleneck of communications at all.
Yeah. So, I know that there might be some people who not necessarily want to be a pinch point, but also want to direct traffic. So wherever you feel that's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because sometimes when you ask people questions and they give you an incomplete answer, you need to go back to them again, and it feels like, to me, it feels like I'm harassing them. And they could legitimately have just forgotten to answer part of your question, but there needs to be the knowledge that you're going to have a back and forth.
I can use the line I use at work. I didn't want a response, I wanted an answer.
Okay.
Okay.
right.
So we have a little bit of work to do. Were there any on those items, were there anything, other points that the committee wanted to bring to our attention where they didn't understand it or feels that it needs to be clarified?
Not other than what we've discussed already.
Okay. Oh, Lucy?
You're muted, Lucy.
Sorry. Pat, I just wanted to clarify something with you. I had understood by what you said that you thought that we should be able to ask questions of the advisory technical because that's where a lot of the sort of nitty gritty gets discussed, and maybe that would be a way of anticipating or heading off any of our issues if we could. So would be actually asking them if it would be possible, if the chair would agree to add us as a standing item.
And I mean, it's just a thought. I don't know how other people feel about it, but that seems to me to be the place where things begin. And if we don't want to be telling people after the fact that that wasn't a good idea, that seems to be an important place. And I think even somebody, I don't know, I feel like in an executive committee meeting or something, somebody said, one of the electeds mentioned that maybe that was a place where we should have a voice.
So,
That raises a question I'd like to ask Mark, which is, I did get the impression very early on that projects were going to be developed initially in the ATC.
Mhm.
And yet, it's from what I hear from Ann, it's actually direct, that the local members are going direct to staff and proposing their projects. And at least this past year, the ATC hasn't really met. And I really am not sure what their role is in creating the work plan.
So, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, if we were talking 20, 30 projects that are going to be developed that are within the core, right? That it would be really impossible for the advisory technical committee to sit in a public meeting and go through the details of 20 or 30 and fill out that form. So the way they're not working direct with our staff, they're working within their member agency staff to create the proposals. And then those proposals, and then they're working, whether it's, let's say it's just I'll give you two examples. Let's say it's just a project that is in Southern Marin Fire Protection District's jurisdiction, and it's a core proposal. Then it would be just Southern Marin Fire District personnel working, filling out that proposal to be part of the suite of projects to be reviewed. Now let's take the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break that's going across multiple agencies. Then it would be a representative from the ATC from each of those member agencies partnering together to create that proposal. And then once they get packaged, they'll use the meeting to share their information for those projects, and then it gets packaged together that's where MWPA staff comes in, helps package together to bring the full package to operations committee. But I just shudder at the thought of trying to develop 30 projects in a public meeting. Would be painful.
Yeah, so the ATC is primarily concerned with core projects. Is that correct?
But they're also building their projects using local mitigation funds, and we are giving them direction to put that through the same project portal, so the local mitigation projects are visible as well.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're right that by the time they get to the ATC, they're already pretty packaged. That it's perhaps within each geographic area. It's having those relationships early, but I don't know that there's any easy way to do that.
Yeah, and that's what we're being challenged with the development of our project portal. No one's ever built anything like this.
Is that so?
No, that's what we're finding out. We found one example with the state water agency. Well, it wasn't Department of Water Resources, but it was another similar water agency that has a similar portal to ours, but not one that's going across what we're doing. So we're kind of breaking new ground with it.
Oh,
In
surprise,
so many
surprise.
ways, Mark.
And you can patent it and sell it when you get done.
I don't
Okay.
need that headache.
The web designers might do that.
All right, at this point, I'm going to open it up to the public and see if they have any questions or need clarification on our discussion about the COC's code of conduct or its policies and procedures.
And looking at the two remaining people in our audience who've stuck it out, I see no raised hands.
Okay, so we have an action that was on the agenda, but I'm going to ask that we continue this until further clarification is needed or is provided back to the committee next month. And that's something that Lucy, Mark, and I will work on the two items that we discussed earlier.
Do you need a vote, Larry, or is it just?
Yeah, we can just take a motion to continue this item for the next meeting.
So move.
Okay, we have Carolyn, and I saw Larry's hand go up to second. All in favor, you can raise your hand or just say aye.
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 Okay, Max, you okay?
Max, are you sticking with us?
To sleep.
Max,
Gotcha, Max. We got you.
Every
Come back,
15 minutes,
Max.
let's go to Max.
He may be chasing Christmas ornaments across the street.
Yeah,
like I
right.
was.
All right.
I had a
Well,
sense he was driving, but
We'll
that's,
list Max as an abstention.
yeah.
Good idea.
Okay, our next item is just informational. If any members of this committee would like to make any comments to the rest of the committee or anything that they'd like to present, now's your time. Okay, seeing none. We have our agenda for the next time. The one thing that we do have is that there'll be the opportunity to elect a vice chair. At the beginning of the meeting, Lucy will assume the position as the chair, and the first item on the agenda will be to elect a vice chair. For anybody who is interested in that position, I don't know, Mark, do you want to take a general statement of interest and so that people on this committee can have something to read in advance, or does this committee feel that they just want to have an oral presentation by anybody who would like to be considered for the position?
Yes, oral.
Yeah, I think oral.
Oral, okay.
And I thought it worked well in July.
Okay, so we will do that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to next month's agenda? I see Mark's hand and Lucy.
And perhaps I'm a little bit delinquent and I should have added it to this agenda, but I would recommend that maybe a little onboarding group for the new members. So that maybe we create just a little group at our next meeting that would pull the new members aside and say, welcome to the COC. This is what we're about.
Okay. Lucy, you had your hand up also?
You're muted, Lucy.
I would very much like to understand a little bit more about the metrics, and Charlotte Jourdain's presentation was very interesting and very fast. Would it be possible for her to give us a presentation, or do you think that I had a number of questions that sort of zoomed by, and plus there wasn't really an opportunity. So I think the metrics are very important to the agency, to us, for our understanding. And if we could have a presentation, if you think it's reasonable, at some point, if not the next meeting, if she's super busy, but at some point I would be very happy with that.
I would think it's reasonable. My recommendation would be we've identified the objectives. Perhaps we wait for the metrics to be finalized for that presentation.
Okay. And when do you think that might be?
January, February.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And it might be too early for an agenda item, but at some point, another field trip. I know Fern has expressed interest in seeing some of the work plan completions done in a future field trip. January might not be the time though, but something we should plan on at some point.
Okay. Yeah, that, Mark, you got that noted, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Can I wish everybody
Yeah.
happy holidays at some point? We're gonna do that? All right.
Yeah, we
That's,
we can do that in
Right.
about maybe in about
Point.
another 30 seconds or a minute here.
okay, okay.
I think with Mark, with the new COC members coming on board, I guess, I don't know, we'll work the way you prefer to. You can provide them with the general orientation, and certainly Lucy and myself as the chair and vice chair can meet with them, and we wouldn't be violating any Brown Act with 4 people. So, we can at least give them an overview of, the work that we've done to date, and, assign them their homework, which is, they need to read up and get acquainted with the one discussion item that they're going to have to take a vote on next time.
I think they should have to read the CWPP, the grand jury report, the lessons learned, the 1,056 pages of the work plan.
Yeah.
The JPA agreement.
I think at least one of them probably already has done all of that and more.
Yes, probably so.
And not to stray off agenda too far, but I do have a packet for new board of directors members that I think would be an appropriate packet to share with COC members.
Yes.
Good one.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you. Okay. Let's see, Kingston, you want to take us out?
I want to wish you all happy holidays
Same
with
to
family and
you.
friends.
Happy holidays. All.
Have a good one.
It's an honor to serve with all of you.
Same
Yeah.
for everybody. Yep.
Merry
Yeah.
Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa.
That's right.
And
Take your pick.
Whoever can sing us out.
That isn't me.
Stay safe.
Oh, that won't be
No
me.
COVID.
Tone deaf. No.
Yeah, so
Special goodbye to Carolyn and Stephen.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you,
course.
Steve.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. And
Take
I'm
care.
sure
We'll miss
we'll
you.
cross paths again,
All right,
so it's not really goodbye or anything.
right. Do we need a motion to adjourn? Or
yeah,
Don't
well,
move. It's appropriate for me. to
that's
move.
right.
I'll
And
second.
yay.
Right, and
There we go.
Steve's the second.
Hey.
Good one,
Carolyn and
guys.
Stephen,
Good evening, all.
All right.
there are no
Okay.
objections.
Watch those decorations, Mark.
Yeah.
Bye.
Oh,
Goodbye,
I gotta
everybody.
go make sure they're all secure now.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care, all.
Bye.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.